Welcome to today's webinar as part of the EDUCAUSE Transforming Leadership webinar series. This is called Navigating Risk, Accessibility, and Strategic Insights. My name is Jason Martin. I'm an online event production manager at EDUCAUSE, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. This webinar, as I mentioned, is one part of a four-part webinar series brought to you by Vantage Technology Consulting Group. Vantage is an EDUCAUSE strategic partner. EDUCAUSE is working closely with Vantage this year to strengthen the collaboration between private industry and higher education institutions, and to evolve the higher education technology market. Please be on the lookout for other content from or connection opportunities with Vantage throughout the year. We're pleased to welcome today's panelists. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment, but I want to give you a brief orientation on our session's learning environment. If you are using social media, please use the hashtag #EDUCAUSEwebinar, and we hope that you'll make this session interactive. To do so, please click on the chat icon at the bottom of the presentation window. You can use the chat throughout the discussion to make comments, share resources, and to pose questions for our panelists. When you do so, please be sure to select everyone from the chat drop-down menu. We will hold a Q&A during the presentation, but we encourage you to type your questions into the chat throughout the webinar. If you have any technical issues, you can send a private message to me by selecting panelists from the chat dropdown. And as always, the session recording and slides will be archived later today on the EDUCAUSE website. With that, thank you all so much for joining us, and I'll hand things over to you, Kirk and Joanna.
Thanks so much, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'd like to echo Jason's warm welcome. We're so pleased to have you join us today for the first in our four-part Transforming Leadership webinar series. Today, we'll be talking about how to talk to your Board of Trustees about risk and information security. My name's Joanna Grama, and I'm a senior principal and partner here at Vantage Technology Consulting Group, where I lead our information security consulting practice. And I'm delighted to be one of your facilitators today.
And I'm Kirk Kelly. I'm also with Vantage Technology Consulting Group. I'm a vice president and I lead our higher education team. My practice focuses on a number of areas: strategic planning, governance, educational technology, and leadership development. We are joined today by two fabulous leaders, Lanita Collette and Matt Morton. We're going to speak about their experiences. I'd like you each to introduce yourself, and we're going to add a little fun today. So if you had to explain cybersecurity risk to a board using only a pop culture reference, it could be a TV show, a movie, or something, what would you pick and why? And Lanita, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Well, my name's Lanita Collette, and I'm coming to you from sunny Tucson, Arizona, at the University of Arizona. I'm the deputy CIO. I have worn a lot of hats here. I've been acting CIO. I was CISO for a number of years and currently mentoring someone into the CISO position at the university. Okay, that's a great question, pop culture. I'm going to pick Lady Gaga, and I'm going to pick her because you never know quite what to expect, which is absolutely true of cybersecurity. And it's a lot more nuanced than you might think at first. It's not just shut it down, you know who the bad guys are. It is, in fact, very complex, a lot of human behavior issues in there. Just like a Lady Gaga performance, there are layers upon layers. And I would also say that her level of creativity speaks to cybersecurity as well, because it's always something new with her. She comes up with all kinds of interesting creative ways to approach music and performance. And the best CISOs out there are also very creative in thinking about how to serve their institutions. So I pick Lady Gaga.
That is great. Matt.
Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm Matt Morton. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Chicago. And I thought about this long and hard, but I think I would use Jurassic Park, and not the new ones, the original, as my analogy, right, as explaining this to the board. And that's because, you know, they spent all this time building this big perimeter to keep the Tyrannosaurus Rex in check and all the hackers or velociraptors out, right? You know, and yet it all failed because of humans and human corruption, right, in the inside. And so that's usually a pretty good analogy relative to what we see with cybersecurity. You know, it's the human side of things that both makes it worthwhile and effective, but at the same time can also fail and cause problems.
Thank you both for those great introductions. I really like it when we can start off with a little bit of fun. So I'd like to invite attendees to share their answer to our icebreaker question in the chat. I think that'd be great for everyone. As we get started today, Kirk and I do have some questions prepared for Lanita and Matt, and we're going to jump into those in a minute. However, since we know our time together today will pass quickly, I want to invite everyone to share any questions that you might have for our panelists in the chat, and we'll try to respond to them during our conversation. And so to take a moderator's prerogative, I was hoping to kick off the serious part of today's discussion by talking about something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, which is how do you frame cybersecurity in a way that resonates with non-technical leadership? And are there particular stories or frameworks or techniques that you have that have really helped get your message across? I'm looking to see who comes off mute first.
I think we were tied, but go ahead, Matt.
Okay, sure. I'll go this time and then you can go next time. We'll alternate. So in terms of dealing with a non-technical audience, that's always a difficult question, right? I think what it is making it relatable. And so I look for things, in the University of Chicago, I look for incidents or things that are in the news, right, in Chicago. And so when I do that and I use those examples, that makes it more relatable to the people, because sometimes they've been impacted by that. Most recently, there's been a power school breach, right? If you see the K through 12 student information system company, they've had a significant problem. Using that as an example with parents or with anybody else that's a non-technical audience, that's usually something they can relate to, something that they can understand.
Now, I'll add to that too, that your board members generally are fairly well versed in matters of risk and risk tolerance versus acceptance, etc. And I think it's you can speak to them from that shared knowledge that information security is one of many risks that your university might be facing. And then from that point, begin to describe how you are mitigating the risk and where you still see unacceptable risk tolerance. And then at the end of the day, it also helps with people would love for you to be able to say, we've handled it, it's all fine. But I think it's good to bring it back to that enterprise risk management understanding where you always have some level of risk that you need to accept at the end of the day or understand that is still being addressed. So I think using that context of risk management for many of your board members, since a lot of them come from business backgrounds, is a good way to find that common ground to have the discussion.
Lanita, that's thank you for that. You got to something I was thinking about, and that's a lot of times we talk about this as a risk to be mitigated. Have either of you been successful transitioning that conversation with the board in a more about how this practice is really an enabler of institutional success? So transition beyond the risk into, if you do this, our institution will be successful.
Yeah, I like to talk about that a bit in terms of our research presence. And so the University of Arizona has a long history of very successful research regarding matters in space. And so when you think about the reputation of the university and how making sure you have secure data storage and secure options for collaborating with researchers from other institutions, et cetera, it brings it home pretty quickly because our reputation as a premier space research institution is very much tied to being able to operate securely. So there's a good story there to tell around why it's important and shared understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I can add a couple of things to that too. I mean, along the same lines, ensuring that our research integrity is protected, right, is one of the core things that we're trying to do. And no matter what level of the research community your institution's at, you want to make sure and have the highest integrity that you can. And this is important to the researchers, but it's also important to the board because to them, that's a discussion about brand. and making sure that the brand is protected and the brand is focused on the culture and what you're trying to do as an institution, right? I mean, there's all the other things that you can do too as well related to making sure that you can gain federal funding, how you support innovation, right? What are the things that you're doing to not disrupt the researchers, right? And go through that. Ultimately, it all comes down to trust, right? And so the idea is as cybersecurity professionals, we have to learn to build that trust with the board.
So I'm curious that you touched upon trust, Matt, because trust is one of the EDUCAUSE top 10 IT issues for 2015, and it really is sort of fundamental to everything we do here in information security and privacy. How do you recruit your CIO or other stakeholders to help them be allies in your message to the board?
So ensuring the CIO is aligned is probably the number one thing you have to do, right? Because whether, and not many of us are in this boat, but whether you report outside the IT organization or you report in the IT organization and are working towards, are working for the CIO, the fact of the matter is this, is that the person who's managing and taking care of all the IT infrastructure has got to be your key stakeholder. And that's also true if, in the research organization or any of the other units that may have their own IT organizations. And so one of the key ways to recruit that person is then you translate it into that value, right? So that they understand how they're bringing value. I think the most relevant recent example of this is many CIOs are under a lot of pressure to deliver artificial intelligence products, projects, whatever you want to call that, specifically around generative AI. Certainly, there's a lot of risk there. But if I come through and I say, absolutely not, we can't do any of this, there's too much risk, blah, 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 that's not necessarily providing that value, right? And so we have to plot this line, a thread through the needle in this case to help deliver that generative AI project while at the same time making sure it's secure and making sure that you get what you need. And that's building that trust, right? The trust of the CIO. Sometimes, and I've made these mistakes early in my career, if we do not, if we could become the department of no, if you will, right, where everything goes to security to be stopped or to say no, what ends up happening is that then people quit coming to you or they go around you or things of that nature. And so what you really want to do is be able to enable the things that are going on and understand what your role is, and then limit that risk and make sure that you're communicating what that risk is to all your business partners.
And I would add that most large research institutions in particular are very decentralized. I think there's a push these days to centralize more, which we certainly are experiencing at the University of Arizona. But when you're operating in a decentralized environment, that trust has to be built through more of a federated approach to information security versus sort of an authority top-down kind of process. And if you look at the issue of trust between, say, a major IT shop, say with your College of Medicine or with your College of Science or whichever big units you might have at your institution, that really is many times much more of a peer-to-peer conversation with the individuals who's charged with security for that organization. It may be wise to start out with, here are some services we can help you with that maybe you don't have in your smaller IT shop, but it's a different kind of conversation versus if you're a smaller institution and you're already fairly centralized, you can say, hey guys, we're going to do it this way. It's always better to lead in a collaborative fashion if you can. And I think that's probably true not just in higher ed, but across the board. We like to sometimes think that it would be nice and easy to just say, do it this way, but that's not what creates trust. What creates trust is saying we're partners in this and leading with, here are some ways I can help you.
You both referenced trust here, and I was thinking about the CIO role. Are there any other particular allies that you've found to be most helpful as you're communicating with the board? Sometimes that's internal board members. Sometimes that's other players across campus that really come in and provide support. Because it's often the CIO and the CISO are kind of viewed in the same vein. And so, have you expanded your base some, and how have you done that?
Absolutely, and that's critical. And so, Chief Risk Officer, huge partner. Office of General Counsel, huge partner. Our ADRs, our Associate Deans for Research, are also partners, and our research department as well. And so, pretty much anybody who has anything to do with compliance, I definitely have formed as deep relationships with as I can across the institution, and they are our partners. They also help others see you as part of that compliance group versus just part of the IT shop, because it is true most of us still report up through the technical organization, but our role is pretty different. Chief Privacy Officer, if you have a separate privacy office, also incredibly important partner.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, I mean, you mentioned the Associate Deans for Research. Frankly, it's the Vice Provost for Research too, right? And so, obviously walk these lines carefully, but I always work with my CIO to ensure that I have that access that I need. There was a mentor many, many years ago that talked about where you should report and so forth. And one of the things he said was, he says, I really don't care where I report as long as I have access. And so that's one of the key things. But having access to that Vice Provost for Research and being able to partner with them to help them get their goals across, making sure that your HPC environments are not only secure but also accessible, right? That they're able to actually do what they are trying to do and deliver to the faculty and to the researchers in your institution. Every chance that I get for that, to have a sit down with a faculty member or with somebody in the research area, I do it, even if it takes more time, because they're just extremely valuable and important stakeholders. Because I mean, at least in my institution, we have multiple businesses, but our primary line of business is research, quite frankly. I mean, we do educate students as well. And we have other things that we do as well, multiple other things, operate some labs, those kinds of things. But this is where the focus is on research.
You both have really complex environments, and I am sure that from time to time you run into resistance to security initiatives. So what are the strategies that you use to overcome that resistance or to meet it head on? And how do you talk about those types of things to the board?
Yeah, I think breaking down resistance and understanding the resistance is really important. I mean, of course, there's always going to be resistance from the faculty that it's a new burden or some things of that nature, right? But I think really it comes down to listening. And that means really actually listening. And so you do have to listen to what people are saying, and what they may be saying may sound crazy at first, like, oh, why do I have to do all this? Can't you just write me a check? I don't want a system to do this, those kinds of things, right? But the fact of the matter is, like, well, let's dig into what's going on behind there, right? And the other thing I might add to that too is that one of the things I work hard at is, we talked about stakeholders within the institution, but there's actually a myriad of stakeholders that the board interacts with in your local area, or whether that is, it could be the United States, it could be in a city. And so I always work hard to ensure I've got a little bit of a presence outside of my institution too as well, because what that does, it gives me a little more leverage to say, oh, he's not just some crackpot, who wants to get this stuff done, but there's actually maybe something to what he's saying, right? And so I'm sure that isn't always the case, but nonetheless, that's also an effective strategy, is to kind of build that presence, that thought leadership, so that your institutions understand that.
Another thing that helps when you run into resistance is to, in fact, demonstrate that peers are engaged in the same kinds of activities. Sometimes that's quite reassuring, both to your leadership and to researchers and faculty members, that look, it's one of EDUCAUSE's top 10 things and has been for years. So obviously it's not just us. And even, if you can get specifics around certain things, like how are you dealing with 800, 171 environments? What does that look like across the country? Where are we in, positioned with that? And, when you can say we're leaders in this area, I think people take pride in that, even if the steps that they have to go through are a little more onerous. Understanding that you're leaders in a particular area does generate some sense of pride and accomplishment, and like, okay, yeah, I can see why this is important. Resistance, boy, sometimes they have a point. And it's important to recognize that. And to your thought, Matt, of really listening, not just sort of listening, but really listening is important, because sometimes you find that, in fact, a particular department is doing something that's more secure than potentially what your central service might provide. And you need to figure out, whether you really want to push to have them, for instance, adopt a central service, or if what they're doing really is quite good, and you should recognize that and potentially then hold them up as an example for other peers around the institution. Let's see what the College of Science is doing. This is really fantastic. You might want to chat with the faculty member over there that made this happen, and that kind of reference. So, referring to peers in terms of other institutions, as well as peers within your institution that are doing a good job. Those can be things to help overcome resistance.
You both talked about resistance, and one of the things that I've focused on in my career for the last few years has been around storytelling and the power of storytelling, and how sometimes that'll carry the day when all the facts and figures you could possibly amass don't seem to matter. And so I'm curious, do either of you have stories or examples from presentations that went well with the board, where you got a lot of positive feedback at the end? And sometimes that positive feedback is surprising, right? It catches you off guard because you're like, I did this thing and I didn't know it was going to be impactful, and it was. So any stories from either of you?
Well, mine is a kind of a practical story. It would not it would not be up there in the realm of fantastic, engaging storytelling. But when you're in front of the board, a lot of times it's pretty cut and dried. And when I've had the best reaction from the board is when you're able to present actual data, like this percent of this is done, that percent of that, things that are truly meaningful kinds of metrics, leading to a sense of confidence in the work that you're doing. For the board, that's what I have seen. Storytelling in other situations, I do like, and Matt referred to this early in our conversation today, I like to talk about things that happen to people in their personal lives, and things that you've heard are becoming kind of hot issues in security that you need to really be careful about. And so my storytelling outside of board does refer to personal kinds of things. But Matt perhaps is a little more comfortable in front of his board and has some storytelling that he has shared. For me, I'm pretty much sticking to the facts.
Well, if I could jump in for a sec, Matt, before you go, Lanita, even as you were
you bet.
describing your use of data, though, I was thinking you are telling a story. And that story is, here's what we've accomplished, here's the path that we're on, and here's how we're progressing down that path. And so you might not think of it as a conventional storytelling, but it sounded to me like you were doing that through the use of data, which is powerful.
Certainly. And I think that's what is appreciated at that moment in time, because they're trying to absorb a lot of information from a lot of different sources, and they really kind of need it. I like to think of it as the funnel. So you start with just all the information in the world, everything your teams have been doing for years, like it's huge, how in the world, and so then you try to just keep moving towards what will actually come out of the funnel, which is like 3 slides, hit the high points. And in fact, perhaps that really is storytelling, in the sense of how do you gather everything in your mind before you sit down to write a story? Well, same thing. It's like you write the first draft, and then you hone it, you really get it down to those things that you know will speak to your audience. So I think the process is the same. The creative process is the same. And I'm working on this right now with the person I'm mentoring into our CISO position at U of A. And he still is in that place, and his name is Tim Schwab. He's a wonderful gentleman, and he would absolutely agree with me. He's in that place where he wants to give all of that information. And so we're working together to see, okay, how can we pull out the juiciest bits here and get it into 3 slides or even 1 slide, depending on how much time we're going to get in front of the board. So I talk about the funnel. I guess you could also call that, the crafting of the story.
Yeah, I mean, all of the things Lenita has said and Kirk has said. And the only thing I would add to that maybe is I like to use sometimes a scenario-based discussion, right? Because I'll get this question. They'll say, oh, if we had a ransomware attack today, would we pay the ransom? Right? That's always a question I get. And so, of course, if I'm not ready for that question, that's a problem. And we can leave the answer to that question to another webinar, okay? But because it's complicated. But using that scenario to kind of help them walk through that, and then weaving into that the metrics that Lenita is talking about and the data with some context, right? You have to have that context, because honestly, I mean, what I find as a patching cadence for my institution may not be what Lenita is looking for at her institution, but it has to have the context about here's what we've observed and why. And this is why this is either an improvement or where we need to improve relative to our security program here.
I think context is king all of the time. And storytelling is one of the things that I'm working on. And Kirk, you're really, really good at this, and you have some powerful stories about talking to leadership. I'm wondering, do you have one, cybersecurity or not, that you can share really quickly?
Yes, I was worried you might say something, because as I was thinking about this, mine was not cyber related. I was a CISO for about a year of my career. The one that I have, and so I'll tell a story about a board presentation, was just that I was presenting to a board, and I had put a lot of work and effort, and I always really spent a lot of time. And Lenita, you were talking about this. How do you craft? You get your data lined up and make sure everything's organized in a way that people can connect the dots. And I had done that, and it was this IT presentation, and I think it was going really well, at least in my own mind. And somebody raised their hand, and this was in the state of Arizona, and they asked about statewide articulation, and I was working in a community college. And because we had just finished a degree audit program, and because I happened to be married to somebody in the curriculum department at the college, I was able to completely describe how the statewide articulation worked. And I told the story from beginning to end. And to this day, I get more positive feedback from my non-IT presentation than I did IT. And I think the reason was, it's like a story, it caught them all unexpected. Like, they didn't think the CIO was actually going to be able to describe this thing.
Right.
They figured I was going to raise the white flag and ask the provost to step up. And I didn't. And so that was and I think this applies here, though, because if we can answer those maybe non-technical questions, if we can get outside of our typical cybersecurity compliance role and talk about the business of the institution, sometimes that provides more power and a more powerful story than anything we prepared.
Yeah, Kirk, that is such a good point. And I think the more we put ourselves in the shoes of people who are sitting on the board and think about all the challenges they have in front of them, and then think about how our issues weave into those, then I think we can get to the place where we'll understand what's going to be most important for them to hear.
So I'm sort of still in the storytelling frame of mind. So I have to ask, what is the most unexpected or surprising question that you've ever gotten from a board member about cybersecurity?
I think for me it was, so if you finished that centralization, right? And this was like, 4 months after we were asked to do it. So yes, that was the most startling question that I've certainly been asked, and that truly was more from CIO perspective, and startling to me, but not a question that they would think twice about asking. Like, okay, you said you're going to do this, it's done, right? Like, not quite. So yeah, that was the most out there one for me.
Yeah, very, very similar question. I think it was great. You're doing a lot in security. When will you be done? Like, my apologies, but unfortunately, this is never done, right? The risks continue, and here's some data to show you how they're actually increasing, even though we're spending more. So,
Out of the two of you, you wind up with board meetings. I don't know what your cadence is at your institution, but sometimes this winds up being the topic du jour, right? You're focused during this board meeting, but then there's all this time in between. And if you found some successful ways, like how do you keep them updated? How do you kind of keep this top of mind between those meetings? Are there any regular touch points or things that you've created that work in that area?
so what I do is my board meets 3 times a year, and I'm in person once in that a year. And then the other ones, I always have a written update as well. And so that creates both some work to do, but at the same time, another opportunity to continue to provide a written update as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, how this is reducing risk, and what to do if you feel like you have questions or any more insights you'd like to provide. I would also say that there is a trend. My outside of higher education peers in the city of Chicago spend a significant amount of time with a one-on-one with the chair of their audit committee usually. Higher ed is not quite as mature yet in that space, but it is getting there. I have had some peers who have mentioned this, and we're getting that scheduled in my organization too.
And it does vary, and it is it top of mind? But we almost always present at the risk and audit committee. So there's subcommittees on various things, and that committee meets more frequently, and so we almost always have at least a slide and be available for questions, presence for that meeting. And then for full board meeting, it does tend to be more if there are specific topics or response to major audits or things like that are of more general. So I've done everything from 4 times a year down to a year that I didn't appear in front of the board at all, and everything in between.
Just a follow up, does your CIO, so one of the things at my last institution we were pretty successful at is even if the CIO wound up presenting to the board, we always slid in some cybersecurity. Like we never stopped the drip, if you will. And I'm just curious if either of you have had success in that area to make sure that it's always showing up. Or sometimes the auditor would have a presentation, and so we would try to go and say, hey, let's throw a couple things in.
Well, I do try to meet with internal audit prior to that, right? So that's one of the things to ensure I know what they're going to say. And then the ability to kind of ensure that I'm aligning in whatever messaging that I've got. In terms of the CIO, we work closely together, and when we present, we present sometimes together, and it's kind of a back and forth, right? Where he's focusing on things and so forth. And so, and then when the hard question comes, he sends them to me, right? No, I'm joking. That's a joke. But seriously, it's making sure that they understand that the CIO is aligned in this too, right? That this is not just a cyber things per se, right? This is not just a security concern, but this is an IT concern, because it's my fundamental belief that most security problems arise because of either bad IT governance or other IT related issues, right? I think someone asked a question about data governance, for example, and data governance is a really, really difficult fish to get your hands around sometimes. And so I think that, ensuring that the board understands that we both are working on this problem together, and that it's a combination of things, and that it's not really a siloed kind of issue is important.
Yeah, and because we appear on the enterprise risk management heat map, have done so every year since I've been at the U of A, that gives us the opportunity to always be on the subcommittee for audit and risk. And for other IT issues, the CIO presents at full board meetings from time to time. And if that happens to have something to do with information security, then our CISO would appear with the CIO. And so we have a pretty good, close relationship with board members. Our CIOs tend to have one-on-one time with board members. Because there are only 3 state institutions in Arizona, I think the board members are a little more accessible than they might be if you have multiple state institutions or multiple campuses with CIOs, et cetera. So, there's only 3 state university CIOs in the state of Arizona, and they tend to know at least 1 or 2 board members and have conversations with them from time to time. So those relationships, I think, are really important, and it kind of keeps that going. And if the topic of consideration is InfoSec, then there's more conversation about that.
You both sort of touched on issues about the proliferation of IT and cybersecurity into other topics. And that, I think, goes to Cindy's question in the chat, where she asked, how does the data governance program at your institution intersect with IT cybersecurity? And we've seen this space change a lot, right? I mean, early data governance programs were always really about making sure people couldn't access or get access they didn't need. And now we see data governance really talking about how does the institution use data as a strategic asset. Where are you tying into those conversations at your institution? And do you have an opportunity to talk about that complexity to your boards?
I think that one's tricky. And you're right. It's been around data stewards for certain kind of data, and that's been well established because when we moved to enterprise web products back when is when we realized we had to do something about that. So we established that kind of, I'll call it lightweight data management around access controls. One of the things that's really coming to the forefront now is resource constraints, and how do we decide of the many IT projects that everybody would love us to do, which ones are we actually going to do? And we're starting to struggle with that a bit. Since we embarked on a journey to centralize more and more of our IT services, once you get centralized and it's not under the control of one VP or dean or even SVP, how are we going to have those conversations about which things are priorities? And we have established a new governance group that will be talking about those sorts of things, and jury is out about how well it will work, right? Because we don't have good muscles around this. We have not exercised these muscles, and so so I think there's going to be some pain, like there is. So I'm storytelling now, Kirk. There's going to be some pain around the muscles that we haven't exercised, and we're going to kind of have to go through it to get stronger. So
Yeah, 100%, Lenita. The data governance is really interesting from a standpoint because it is related to IT governance too, right? Which we don't do well either. And when you couple those things together, that's where cybersecurity issues can pop up. And so that's where my involvement is, I guess, if you will, is to help kind of head things off at the pass, so to speak. I'm integral to creating our data governance strategy, but I am careful not to take responsibility for it because it is really a business function, in my opinion, right? I would say too, it's going to actually become a very critical aspect to all of institutions in the next 5 years or less. And the reason I say that is if you don't have relatively good knowledge management and data governance, your implementation of artificial intelligence is going to be difficult to do, because that's what underpins the value of any AI project that you're going to do, is the ability to tie it to the data and the knowledge that your organization, your institution's creating, right? And so that's kind of a key thing. Do I have a solution for that? No, I don't have any solutions for that yet. But the fact of the matter is that it is still a critical aspect to things, and the better and quicker people can get their leadership on board to understanding that data governance is kind of underpinning all of the value that they're creating, I think the institution will be much better off.
Matt, I just think you hit the nail on the head so well when you said that it's not the responsibility of the CISO or anyone in IT department to decide these questions, these really tough questions. And people would love for us to do it because it's hard. And a lot of times, you know, we will get that request and then we'll have to say, well, there are other people that need to be in the room with us to have that conversation. I'm happy to moderate the conversation. I'm happy to help provide the tools needed for whatever the priorities of the university are. I mean, a lot of language along those lines. And I often then say, and if there's pushback about, well, isn't this your job to do? It would be, do you really want the university's mission critical activities to be decided by the IT team? Nicer language than that, but is it really, I mean, you want your CIO to decide which direction your university is going for AI? That's not okay. I mean, we got to have a lot of voices in the room there. So I turn it back to decision rights, like who has the right to decide how we're going to spend these resources for the university, and who else then needs to be in the room if the people currently in the room don't have the authority to make those decisions and spend that money and shift the university in a different strategic direction. And I've seen this a lot over my career, where there are a lot of decisions that are being made by technical staff because of a dearth of knowledge about the impacts of those decisions on the part of leadership. You know, and the staff go, well, I think this is the right product, let's do this. And then, of course, it doesn't always meet the needs. And it's a tough situation when you're already down the road and you have to just accept sunk costs and change directions.
That is a very, very good point, because that is one of the most hardest conversations to have with the board, is with compliance. And when you're talking about compliance activities, most institutions, but also in the private sector as well, of a certain size, they push those decisions down, right, to the people who maybe understand the technicalities of those decisions, but don't understand the broader impact it'll have on the business potentially, like if there's a failure, right? So sometimes then that puts and creates this environment of risk, and then trying to communicate that to the board to say, help them understand that the reason we have such a high risk appetite is because our leadership is so distracted by what is going on outside of our institution that we can't focus right on the actual operational capacity and the operational abilities of what we're doing.
You both hit on something that got me thinking about a question, and it just has to just back to resources and governance and priorities. And one of the things that we're hearing across the space pretty strongly, and wouldn't be a surprise to either of you probably or anybody listening, it's just in addition to the 2026 enrollment cliff, which has started hitting institutions, and we're seeing, enrollments are soft. There's the changes now at the federal level, and so there's a lot of budget crisis happening across our institutions. And I'm just curious if either of you are thinking about that, how you communicate with the board, how you make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There's some essential compliance and security things that you both have to make sure get maintained at your institutions. And I guess I'm wondering how you're reeling from the recent changes, because we're talking to a lot of people that certainly are.
I mean, again, an area I don't have complete answers in, right? Because if I did, I'd be putting in the stock market. But the fact of the matter is that in an intense area where there's a lot of change going on, I try to do a little bit of scenario planning, and I kind of go, worst, best, likely, right? And focus on that. And then I think about both what does this impact look like, and how would I communicate this, right? How do I say this? Like, are we going to have to start making decisions about particular compliance objectives because now they're no longer going to be required, right, for federal grants? I don't know. We don't know that, right? But what we do know is that we have to plan for that potentiality, right? And so that's why when we're selecting tools or we're trying to build a program, that's where the words business value, and I think someone in the question list or in that chat said the word alignment, right? And that's where you align with the organization, right? You make sure that the things that I'm providing are aligned with the organization's risk appetite and aligned with the organization's goals for the future. And I may have to adjust based upon the items that you just mentioned, Kirk, that come through our news feeds every day. And we'll do it, and we'll embrace it, and we'll work through it like we have for 1,200 years in education, right? And but it, like I told my dad years ago, they don't call it work because it's like vacation; they call it work. So that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the hard work is definitely happening right now. I mean, we're certainly reviewing everything we do in the context of adjustments that need to be made. Like, for instance, how are we going to support AI initiatives? One of the things that always happens in IT is we get more and more, but no one wants us to get rid of those things that they have clung to, that really maybe you only have a handful of people using a service that's been around forever. Like, now's the time that we have to have that conversation about, okay, that takes, 5 hours of development time every single week because it breaks all the time because it was in-house and it was blah, blah. Okay, and there's exactly 10 people still using it. Well, maybe now is the time that we have to take a look at shifting them to other tools to help them. But I do think that it is a particularly difficult time right now, like kind of unprecedented. Yes, we've been dealing with things for a very long time, but when they're gonna lay off half of the Department of Education, that is truly a different time. And yeah, those questions about if they're not going to focus on compliance anymore, how much money do we as an institution put towards compliance? I mean, my goodness, we never thought we'd be thinking about that. But we do need to think about that and how we're, what are we going to take away from in order to move forward is kind of the conversation now.
You think we have an opportunity to get rid of Scantron machines finally?
Oh, Matt, I do not know, because doesn't it matter how much power the people have who are who are saying we need the Scantron, right? Like,
oh, you said it exactly like I was thinking it.
Yep. We are definitely old-fashioned, somewhat feudal collection of people who have intricate and long-term power interactions, and it's truly amazing. My background is actually a lot in anthropology as well as technology, and I'm fascinated every day by the complexity of the culture inside of major universities. Like, never a day am I bored. I have not been bored from the moment I stepped on campus.
It's good not to be bored. And I don't want you to take away my dial-up modem. But one of the questions in the chat from Paul, which is I really think speaks to what both of you are talking about, is will IT ever be aligned with our organizations? We've talked about alignment. Paul says in his 30 years of experience in corporate and higher ed, we've talked about alignment. Are we getting better at aligning with our institutions?
I don't know. I think we are, because what I've seen is a shift from in our institution, and I think happening elsewhere, is a shift from multiple IT shops not even talking to each other to IT shops beginning to either combine or at least talk to each other. And the more we are internally aligned in terms of IT and understanding what each other is doing, then we have a better hope of aligning with leadership, right? So if we are able to say, here's the tool set we're using across the institution. And yes, different tools by different departments, but in terms of our large tool set that everybody needs, everybody's using the same thing, then it becomes easier to have alignment with leadership when they say, can we do this? And you can then say, yes, we actually can make sure that DeepSeek isn't present on the mobile devices that we manage on behalf of the university, because we're all using the same platform. We have visibility into it across the board. We know there's still going to be places here and there that someone is using it that we don't control, but for the vast majority, we can say yes. And so I think that alignment comes in stages of first aligning across IT services and IT organizations, then having that greater visibility, and then being able to respond, because leadership is never going to feel aligned with us if we can't respond to the things they ask us to do. If you can't respond and give leadership what they need, then you're not going to be aligned. And so how do you get to that place of being able to respond? I think you have to increase the amount of visibility that you have, your collaborative efforts. You have to make sure your services are robust and easy to consume and work for people. Like, there's a whole lot under the hood. Matt, earlier you said you think that cybersecurity is really more, it's an IT challenge. Was so very true. Like, are the machines across your institution, do they even have malware protection on them? Well, the answer to that is generally, I don't know, because there's multiple different management platforms or not managed at all. And, how do you get your hands around that? You can't have good cybersecurity if you have a messy IT situation. You just can't. And you can turn yourself inside out all day long and you still won't. You can educate, you can partner, you can do all of those things. But if you don't have some sense of visibility across your organization, you are going to be extremely challenged going forward. I know that's a little bit of a statement, but I do think it's true.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm a little more cynical in that I think I think we are getting better, yes, but I do think it's cyclical too. It's very much related to cycles of new generations, and like Lenita, I always take an anthropological approach to how I view kind of the cyber and the history of cyber and so forth. And we go through these cycles, and there's up cycles where it's prominent, and then there's down cycles where it won't be as prominent. And we'll just have to continue to do that and adapt to that. But ensuring we're agile in our approach, making sure we can adapt to what those cycles are doing and what our leadership is thinking about that, that's alignment. That's how I define it to me. I don't ever expect to get to be 100% on any of these particular things, right? But I definitely do think that by being adaptable and by being agile in the responses and approach, that is about as aligned as we're going to get.
Yeah, and I really do think that alignment for leadership means, can you deliver what I need, right? Can you deliver what we need as an institution? And the answer to that question leads us to alignment, I believe.
Yeah.
And Paul, thank you for asking the question, because it was a great question. Provocative, yes, but critically important. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, it was a great question. Matt, it kind of reminded me of what you said earlier about the board members saying, when are you going to be done? And I don't, to me, alignment is kind of like communication. We're just going to work on it all of our careers. And at the end, we'll probably still have some work to do. But we're striving in that direction. I'm certainly, I've been at this, I shouldn't say, but I've been at this like 38 years. And I think that we're much more aligned than the olden days, where really nobody understood IT and IT just did what it wanted to. And just
I'm trying to align more to a river is what I'm trying to do, and the trout that are in it. That's one of my alignment is focused on. So
So a quick question. So just thinking about this, you kind of answered this earlier. We were talking about what questions surprised you by board members. If there was one misperception, or just board members don't quite understand your world, if there was one thing you could fix, what would it be? How much you do it? Or have you done that? Have you actually had an example where you just didn't think they understood something, either compliance or cybersecurity related, and you tried to close the gap? So I asked it both ways,
I-
and it might just be one that's the top of mind. Like, well, I wish I could close this gap.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I think from my perspective, it would be perceiving cybersecurity and IT and myself even, or the CIO specifically, as technologists and not as communicators. That'd be the perception. You know, I've run into that perception a couple of times, and changing that perception has been difficult, but when I do it, it helps immensely, right? And so that's one of the things. That's a misconception. Sometimes board members are like, "Oh, let me talk to the nerds," right? You know, no, that's a much different view of things, I guess. You know, maybe it's not quite the 1950s anymore. At least I didn't think so. And you know, I think now we have nerds that can communicate too. So that would be the misconception, I would think.
Yeah, that we're full humans engaged in life and not just nerds. That's a misconception I think a lot of people have. But and the more human we can be with our peers, the better. Sometimes I think we like to hide a little bit behind, well, I'm technical, you know, so it's like, well, you could do that, but you're also human, and your life will be so much richer if you do step forward and think for a moment, how would I say this thing in a way that anyone could understand, and not, you know, just sort of have that sly, well, they won't get it, but it's actually up to me to figure out how to say this so they will get it. So I think that journey is an important one for anybody to take who's engaged in technology. And I had already shared the misconception that was the most startling, which was that centralization was all done in 4 months. And so I'll just leave that there.
I think you'll be the envy of everyone, Lanita, because you got it done in 4 months. It's quite amazing. I think we're almost to the top of the hour. So rather than ask you another question and take us over time, we'll give everybody a minute to get ready for their next meetings. Matt and Lanita, thank you so much for the conversation today. This was amazing. And I want to thank the attendees for the questions in the chat. It always helps make webinars much better to have questions from the audience. Kirk and I have really enjoyed moderating today, and we hope that you found this discussion useful as you contemplate speaking to your institution's leadership about information security risk. Jason, with that, I'll turn it back to you to close out today's session.
Yes, thank you all. Really appreciate it. As mentioned, there's a couple announcements in the chat. Please do take this opportunity to complete the survey. We appreciate that. This is one part of 4-part series of a webinar too, so we actually can look at that feedback as we prepare for our next sessions as well. So please take advantage of that opportunity. The recording from today's session will be made available on the registration page for today. You can also see there that it's linked to the next 3 webinars. If you haven't registered, please do that. Other than that, thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time and the great discussion. We look forward to seeing you at the next iteration. Thank you all.
Thank you.